can't talk about this subject without Charles Manson. There's so many connections there.
Hey guys, we are back for another episode of Haunted Canyon, our deep dive into the canyons of California. Man, there's just so much there. The more we research, the more we look, it's like almost like this rabbit hole never ends. What do you guys think? Which, by the way, my two co-hosts, BT and Lindsay. Okay, sorry.
Hey guys.
Hey.
Yep. So, what do you guys think? There's just so much, isn't it?
There's
I mean,
a lot. Yeah.
It's easy to get lost in the sources getting into this.
Yeah, we as a podcast, we really make it a big deal to be skeptical even about the conspiracy and the paranormal and all that kind of stuff, because I think a good Christian is skeptical, and we need to be. I think that's part of our spiritual warfare thing. So like what Lindsay said, it's perfect. We need to make sure our sources. There's nothing worse than for a Christian to be permeating something that's, like a myth, like fiction about holidays and et cetera, and act like it's true, and there's no way it's true.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for the audience who might not know, we're talking about this canyon that's nestled into the Hollywood Hills there, that just exudes this aura of mystery and intrigue.
Yeah.
They call it Laurel Canyon.
And on this episode, we're kind of, as you know, guys, we're kind of switching around who's in the hot seat, who did a lot of the research. And in this episode, we're going to dive into, and you can't have an episode or any sort of series on Laurel Canyon without this individual. And I'm talking about the infamous man himself, Charlie Manson. And so, Lindsay, you took a really deep dive into the Manson. You want to give us some background, and we can just talk about different things dealing with Charlie?
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, you can't talk about, like you said, connections there. I mean, he frequented he was based in Hollywood at one time. He'd spent some time, I'll talk about it a little more, up in San Francisco in the other hippie mecca, the Haight-Ashbury up there.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't not talk about that either, but
yeah, that's true. Yep.
But yeah, he knew a lot of the crowd there. I wouldn't even consider him an outsider there. Everybody knew him.
No.
He hung out at the different houses, and it's just, he really sort of exposes kind of that darker underbelly of the 60s counterculture, and particularly the whole quote-unquote hippie thing that, reading into this made me think that maybe the whole peace and love hippie part of the counterculture was just kind of the poser surface of the whole thing, and underneath there you just see a lot of darkness, a lot of nihilism, a lot of occult, a lot of violence, a lot of the 1%er bikers.
Yeah. Like Hell's
Satanic.
Angels. Yeah.
And a myriad of cults. So, yeah.
Well, I want to say this, interject here, if you're sorry, Lindsay, is a lot of people don't realize you were talking about how Manson fit in. Dude, not only did he fit in, he actually tried out for Neil Young, and Neil Young loved him and was going to produce some of his like records and stuff. And if you're interested, you guys, you might not be. I think BT found him, but his songs are what? On YouTube, BT?
Yeah, you can find, you just Google Charles Manson songs and you'll, I mean, they're not like music videos, but they're his voice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But not to mention his relationship, I'll get into a little bit later, with Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys, and that the Beach Boys took one of his songs, changed it, and recorded it. So, I mean,
I didn't even know that. Wow.
Yeah.
There you go.
It was called Cease to Exist. Anyway, but
where did Manson come from? Yeah, can you just tell me a little bit of where he came from?
Well,
because he didn't originate in California.
No. He was from Appalachia, more or less. He was born in 1934.
Yeah.
No name Maddox. That was his mother's last name. Because she wasn't 100% sure who his dad was. He was born in Cincinnati, though I think they lived in the Ashland, Kentucky area. I think Cincinnati was just the hospital he was born in, but they lived in the Ashland, Kentucky area. And he kind of spent his time when he wasn't in some juvenile facility, kind of between, I think, Ashland, Kentucky and adjacent parts of West Virginia, the Charleston area of West Virginia, and probably adjacent parts of Ohio, kind of a tri-state area there.
Somebody sent a picture of him. I don't remember which one of you guys it was, and young picture, and he is actually good looking.
Yeah, he was a good-looking guy when he was young.
Yeah.
Especially in the late 50s, some of the pictures in the late 50s. He kept his hair pretty short and in the style of that time, and
yeah.
I mean, this idea that he looked strange is always funny to me. He looked like a typical, especially the typical image of him when he was captured with the long hair and beard.
Pre-swastika.
Yeah.
Well, that was pre all of his big things.
Yeah.
He was a rather short guy, but otherwise he looked like a lot of guys looked around that time.
How tall was he, Lindsay?
I think he was 5'6", so he's taller than me. So maybe I'm short. But
I thought he was like 5'1" or 5'2".
Right.
Wow. He was rather short and slight.
But he carried a huge spiritual presence with him.
Yeah, he had charisma.
Yeah.
Well, so anyway, he was born.
That wasn't in his early life, though, right? I mean, he was kind of like a moron in his early life.
Yeah, he barely literate and had a 109 IQ initially.
But we'll let Lindsay get to that.
Yeah. But so his presumed father was a guy named Colonel. I don't know if that was a name or a title.
Nickname.
Colonel Scott. The guy that gave him his last name was just another boyfriend of his mother at the time. The
Manson last name?
Yeah. Okay. But Colonel Scott was his presumed biological father. I mean, he occasionally paid child support. He was his mother brought suit a few times. So, but yeah, he was born in the kind of mid-30s in Appalachia, kind of that Kentucky, West Virginia, Ohio area over there. And very early on, it's interesting. At one point, he was living with this very religious aunt and uncle in West Virginia who were really strict with him but loved him. Whereas his mother let him do whatever he wanted so long as she didn't get in his hair, but didn't show much love to him. So he had those two extremes. This very strict, I think some sort of Pentecostal upbringing where, he life was pretty miserable, but in their mind, that was giving him a good Christian upbringing. A lot of legalism, I would imagine. And and then his mom, who just let him do whatever he wanted to, but didn't really show him much love or affection. So, yeah, he had those two things sort of playing tug of war with him as a child.
Yeah.
That's like trauma waiting to happen.
Oh, yeah.
Kids get confused. That happens a lot of times with kids that parents share custody. One parent's more lenient and the other one's more strict, and it creates so much trauma. It's almost better for them just to stay with one parent and visit. But anyway, shoot that rabbit! Boom!
Yeah. Anyway, so he gets sent to this was before, in 1947, his mom tried to put him in the Gibbolt School for Boys in Terre Haute, Indiana. He was 12, and according to school records, he was had poor institutional adjustment. His attitude towards schooling was at best only fair.
So he had a hard time adjusting to the Prussian system of education, huh?
Oh yeah.
Who doesn't?
Exactly.
How odd.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think his first crime, he knocked off a grocery store and stole money actually to rent a room.
Okay. He just
And
wanted to stay somewhere nice.
soon after that, he got sent to the famous and infamous Father Flanagan's Boys Town. I think he had lied
Yeah.
and said he was Catholic or something, or somebody said he was Catholic.
Okay.
So yeah, just in and out of these different juvenile facilities most of his life. At some point, he gets married and makes his way to California, where he's basically just a pimp, pimps out girls and
Yeah, he goes to prison. He goes to prison in, what is it, Indiana?
Was
I
that
don't know if he ever went to prison in Indiana. These were all juvenile facilities
Okay.
up to
But one
that
of the
point.
places he ended up was
Okay, okay. He
Moundsville,
goes to
Ohio.
prison in Ashland, though. You're going to get to that, though, right?
I don't remember him going to prison in Ashland at any time.
Maybe not. Yeah, Ashland's where he's born, right?
Yeah.
And that's the one with the. I'll throw this little interesting occult factor in there. There's a huge mound in right in the middle, center of Ashland, and one of the guys I was reading, Peter, what's his last name, Lavinda.
Govinda,
Um,
yeah.
yeah,
Wow.
he speculated how Charlie could have been playing on the Indian mounds as a little kid.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that whole area, I mean, even in the West Virginia part, is
Yeah.
covered with mounds. So either way, yeah. So yeah, at some point in the late 50s, he finally gets out of the institutions. He'd spent over half his life in them, and he's married and makes his way out to Southern California, where he just petty crime and pimping women out, and then cashes a bad check, which finally gets him put in Terminal Island.
Where's that at, Lindsay? Where's
It
Terminal Island
is
at? I know it's in California, but
near Los Angeles,
okay.
between the neighborhoods of Wilmington and San Pedro. And yeah, this is the first prison he went to.
About the only California prisons I know is Folsom, of course. You know Johnny
Yeah,
Cash
well,
fame.
it's also the place where his IQ has suddenly made a
Oh,
jump
okay. We'll get into that. What?
to about 120. And he told Susan Atkins, one of the Manson cult or the family
Family?
girls,
Yeah.
that he didn't tell her when, but at some point when he was in prison, the infinite comes into his cell. And I wonder if this wasn't that time. And he resisted it, but whatever this infinite was kind of entered him. Surprise, surprise, his IQ goes up.
And that just doesn't happen. I mean, I'm an
Yeah.
educator. I was a school teacher. You don't. You can't read just a few books and your IQ jump up. I mean, it requires like lots of mastery and mastering of skills to increase your IQ. So yeah,
Yeah.
that was supernatural, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Oh,
Yeah. So yeah,
Yeah.
So he's inspired.
but
He gets inspiration from some kind of extra intelligent
Yeah, Sinister
force.
Force.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's sinister forces, really.
Yeah, yeah.
so this is kind of his first trip to prison. He gets out and just goes back to his usual petty crime and pimping girls again. He actually set up this fake. Yeah, he got out around September of '58, and he actually sets up this sort of fake like talent agency that's really just out of a hotel room that's really just a front for him for prostitution, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, he
That's nothing new for L.A. I mean, that's
oh yeah,
guys do that all. They take advantage of these poor starlets that come out there to get. I mean, Poison wrote a song about it, Fallen Angel. So
oh yeah.
it's a pretty common thing out there.
So yeah, the second time around, he gets sent back to prison. He goes to McNeil Island in Washington, and this is where he'll spend till 1967 till he gets out. And he's got some interesting people in there. A guy named Alvin Creepy Carpus, who was part of the Ma Barker gang,
Yeah.
and teaches him how to play steel guitar or something like that, or some sort of guitar technique. He was in jail with Danny Trejo, the actor, around that time, who Trejo claims that he actually practiced some hypnosis techniques on him. Manson did.
On Danny.
On Danny
Really?
Trejo, yeah.
Wow.
And yeah, it was at this time that he started studying hypnosis and also reading a very important book to his development called Stranger in a Strange Land by Robert
Robert
Heinlein.
Heinlein. Yep.
Yeah.
Another Laurel
Yeah,
Canyon.
yeah. Lived in
Yep.
Laurel Canyon.
Yep.
And he named his son after the main character. His son, by the way, this son, he had another son before this that died, but his son is still alive. He was affectionately known as Pooh Bear to the family, but he actually named him after the main character in this Stranger in a Strange Land book. It's about this human from a colony that had been sent to Mars that comes back to Earth, and it's just typical family stuff, Manson family stuff. I mean, he's got a harem. He goes around killing people. A lot of the terminology Manson used, we got from the book, and it just, yeah, you can tell this book had a huge impact on Manson and shaped his thinking in a lot of ways.
Yeah, Robert Heinlein. Interesting thing about Robert Heinlein is he is a self-proclaimed conservative, and he did
Yeah,
not like the counterculture out there, which is really interesting.
Well, the
That
counterculture itself didn't get started just randomly.
no,
It
oh,
didn't
absolutely
no,
it
not.
didn't make any
No,
sense to just pop up. I mean, sure, Manson's around and we've got Vietnam kicking off, but the thing is the anti-war movement itself didn't it was small. I mean, it was small peas. It's small peas all the time in the rest of the world, but the fact that it got as massive it was for Vietnam didn't stand to make a lot of sense because that same kind of behavior and methodology wasn't around for the Korean War and it wasn't around for
exactly.
World War II.
World War
So
II. Yep.
what in the world is going on had to have been established by something outside for this
yeah,
anti-war counterculture to kick off.
yeah. Well, we'll get into that later, but
Yeah.
a lot of the intelligence connections, people sometimes mistakenly think, "Oh, that was to discredit the counterculture." But the problem with that is these intelligence communities created that. Why would they want to get rid of it? Anyway, we'll get to
Exactly.
that more
Yeah.
later.
Yeah.
It's during this second one that he does an experiment with the radio, with the prison radio and using the headsets
Yeah, I've heard of that. Yeah, I remember that.
where he puts suggestions. One of them was involving a basketball game or something that was being played there that he bet a lot of money on. And yeah, he's already starting to learn his craft as far as brainwashing, breaking
Manipulation.
people down.
Yeah.
He doesn't have the drugs to help with that yet, but we can already see him starting to form this. And I mean, he does a lot of the same things that MK Ultra, the CIA, the FBI.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. So it makes you wonder. Okay, where did he get this stuff from all of a sudden?
All right. Well, let me ask you a question here, Lizzie, and you can feel free to put me off till later in the show if you're going to cover this. But there was a rumor that he was a CIA plant and handled by the CIA. Did you do you want to handle that later, or is that something you
Well,
can address now?
yeah. I mean, that's an interesting question because was he a direct? I think what you're asking, was he a direct
Yeah, yeah,
knowing?
yeah, yeah. Was he an officer and then had a handler?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
I did not find any like smoking gun to show that in anything I read. But
yeah. It's a rumor.
what I did find in I'll get to that later.
Okay, okay.
So yeah, McNeil Island, he's there till 1967, and then he gets parole. And I came across this time and time again. He kind of, maybe he knew, I don't know if he was being used by the CIA, he knew the kind of things he was going to be involved with, or I mean, he knew that some entity had entered him and knew that this was not going to end well. He actually begged to stay in prison. He didn't feel like he was going to ever make it on the outside. And when you think about it, it was only like 2 years. This whole thing from him getting released in 67, his apprehension after the Tate LaBianca murders in 69. I mean, it's about 2 years. This whole episode, well, not that long when you really think about it.
Well, but a lot happens in those 2 years.
Yeah,
man.
so much happened. I mean,
yeah.
Anyway, he gets out, and initially he's in L.A. A guy named Peter Smith is his parole officer, and gives him permission to go up, or he just goes to San Francisco, I think, and Peter Smith kind of gives him permission afterwards. And, just kind of the whole hippie thing has made its way up to Haight-Ashbury around this time. There's a lot of acid and there's a lot of gurus walking around. Well, he all of a sudden becomes one of these gurus. He meets his first sort of follower, Mary Brunner, with whom he has his child. She's sort of his first disciple, if you will, around this time, and just starts collecting this gaggle of girls and hanging out at the Haight-Ashbury free medical clinic around the same time, run by another Smith, unrelated, named
Roger
Dave.
Smith, right?
No, Roger Smith works there.
Okay.
Is his parole officer. David Smith runs the clinic.
Okay.
They're both doing different experiments. Roger Smith was more criminology and the effects of drugs and the counterculture, whereas David Smith is studying the effects of acid on mice and people while he's running this clinic, and obviously using his interaction with people as part of these experiments.
I wonder, Lindsay, too, to interject here. I wonder, and this is speculation, you guys. I don't know. I can't say this is true, but I just wonder if the CIA was using, they created a petri dish, so to speak. And then they decided, okay, we've done this in laboratories, Operation Project Montauk, all this kind of stuff. What is it going to look like if you put them into social conditions without the laboratory constraints? And I think it seems like they made a petri dish and then they introduced this stuff and just to see where it would go in the culture. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think no one better than Manson.
Yes,
shows that. I mean,
charismatic as he is, man.
Yeah. I think it seems like they just turned people they may have turned people like him loose just to see what would happen, and see how people can be controlled, how it goes wrong, what are the things we need to just, how can we control this, or how could we, just another part of it was just sowing chaos.
Yep.
To, make people want order, and then they get to make the order. So I think there's all of that going on.
Reminds me of a psyop we just went through not too long ago. About let's see how the people react, and we reacted just like the sheep they thought we were. So
we all bought up all the toilet paper.
Yeah.
Yep.
And we're not going to say the word of it because I don't want to be crunched with this podcast, but everybody out there knows what we're talking about. So
the great toilet paper debacle 2020.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so Manson, he's in San Francisco. He's associated with this Haight-Ashbury clinic, who, by the way, is a big supporter of it, is the mother of Abigail Folger, one of the Tate LaBianca murder victims. He was also occasionally at Berkeley. He would make his way down there. I think that's where he met Mary Brunner, actually. And around the time Abigail Folger is working on the Berkeley campus, so there's all these weird places where he must have crossed paths with the murder victims, and
they almost seem like, us coming from a Christian perspective, it almost seems like it's serendipitous, like it's God's providence, which we know it's not. But it makes me wonder if there can be a negative providence, so to speak. I mean, I know the sinister forces aren't omniscient and omnipotent and all that, but they're smart enough to set up a chance meeting or whatever. What I wanted to ask you, Lizzie, is the other lady that he met. Who was she before? Not Abigail Folger, but the other lady he met at UC Berkeley. Where does she come into play in this?
Mary Brunner. Well, I mean, she's important because she was the first. She was his first disciple, and
okay. I just wanted everybody out there to know that. Yeah,
she had a kid with him, still alive, and that was one of the first. Yeah, Pooh Bear, one of the first kids to live in the commune. Imagine what that must have been like for a kid.
Oh, yeah, I can't imagine. I mean, I've heard stories from the whole River Phoenix, Joaquin Phoenix, for the Family of God, and then what they're a part of, whatever cult, and I mean, they had horror stories, so I can't imagine Manson's cult. Anyway,
I mean, Manson's big thing was like he wanted them to get rid of their inhibitions, and I'm not going to go into detail here, but he performed a terrible act on a child at one point. Right. This alone should have gotten him back in jail. And they were watching.
Report him?
Well, I'll get to this later, but the LAPD and the LA Sheriff Department was watching him. I mean, they.
Oh man.
Yeah, and we'll get to it later, but there was a big raid on the Spahn Ranch. Anyway, I haven't even mentioned Spahn Ranch yet, but
right.
Well, the criminals have a name for this. When certain criminals keep doing really bad things and they get away with it, you know what they're called? Snitches.
Yeah. Right. Anyway.
Or CIA ops.
Exactly. That's what I mean. CIA ops. Yeah, keep going.
At some point, he makes his way down to L.A., gets permission again from his parole officer, something he probably wasn't supposed to do. At one point, he tries to go to Mexico. I don't know if he actually did or not. He may have. Something that, leaving the country would have been, I mean, that's just not something they generally let parolees do. But
nope.
He makes his way down to the Los Angeles area. Initially, he mostly stays in the kind of the Topanga Canyon area. At some point, Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys picks up some of the girls and takes them back to his Sunset Boulevard home. And at some point, he meets Charlie, and Charlie and the girls just move in with him and just start taking his stuff. And, he's kind of into this hippie commune thing at the time. So he just kind of lets it happen. And
who, Wilson?
Wilson, yeah, he was very close with, but he also would have met around this time a friend of Wilson's who we found out later was a lot closer to the Manson family than he claimed, Terry Melcher. The son of the famous actress Doris Day, one of those America's sweetheart actresses. He would have met him around that time. And he's hanging out. He's playing music with Dennis Wilson. Dennis Wilson is totally okay with him. Has to know some of the things he's doing. Has to see the control. I'd be very surprised if he didn't hear his racist remarks around this time. But for whatever reason, is totally okay with him.
Well, anyway, Dennis Wilson was strung out too on
he was on drugs around this time that he probably didn't know which way was up himself. But he eventually makes his way. Dennis Wilson finally had enough of him, and he makes his way out to the Spahn Ranch. At some point at this time, he had probably already made some field trips out to Death Valley because part of his plan, and this ties into a lot of the Helter Skelter stuff, is to move out there to the Death Valley area and they steal a lot of cars and convert them into doom buggies. We'll get to that later, but like towards the end, there was this almost like Mad Max existence out at
Wow.
in Death Valley. They ride dune buggies and live off whatever they can steal, and yeah. But anyway, he goes out to Spahn Ranch. This is a ranch in the mountains, kind of outside of LA. Let me
Santa Monica or Santa Ana. I'm just naming some mountain ranges around there.
Santa Susana Mountains.
Okay. Yeah.
It's in the kind of the Simi Hills, Santa Susana Mountains area. It's run by an elderly guy named George Spahn, who's nearly blind. And the deal is they live there, and they're supposed to help out with the hand. It had been kind of a B Western set in the past. It had like a saloon and different stuff like that.
Yeah.
At this point, it was just kind of a horse ranch. Like people would come horseback riding there, and there was just different ways. George Spahn, I think occasionally they still film movies there, but it was kind of struggling and in decline. They weren't doing as many westerns around this time, and so Charlie kind of convinces this elderly Spahn gentleman that they can stay there and help out, and just basically let them stay there in exchange for working on the property.
Thank God he couldn't see what they look like, huh?
Well, goodness great.
He probably could smell them, though. I mean, I've heard.
Yeah, I imagine so.
Hippies weren't known for baths.
Yeah, but part of the thing was Charlie gave him access to the girls there, particularly Lynette Squeaky Frome.
Yeah.
She got her nickname from the squeaking noise. This is terrible. He would make when she would make when he would put his hands on her or something like that. Yeah.
Keep it PG.
Yeah. It's hard to do when you're talking about Manson, but yeah,
Mhm.
so they move out to the Spahn Ranch area in '68. This is around the time Charlie's starting to borrow stuff from other cults. He's starting to listen to the Beatles' White Album, particularly a song called Helter Skelter, and
All right. All right.
feels
All
like
right. Stop there. I have got to know about that. I've wondered, and I've read a lot of stuff on Manson too. Not as much as you, but okay. Explain to me the significance of that song and why he adopted it and stuff.
well, he claimed that he was getting messages from the song about the coming collapse of the world.
Another Adventist. It's interesting how all these cults are always Adventist cults.
Yeah, he was just obsessed with this album. In fact, Susan Atkins got one of her nicknames, Sexy Sadie, from one of the songs from the album. I think that was on the White Album.
Yeah. Now she's the one that lived and ended up writing a book about all her stuff.
Yeah,
Wasn't it?
a lot of them wrote books.
Okay.
Hers is one of the ones I read.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was on the White Album. So yeah, he's obsessed with this album and feels like the album is speaking to him about some coming collapse. And Revelation chapter 9, and he basically starts treating this song almost like scripture, like his holy book in a sense, and getting messages from it. And he starts developing this idea that there's going to be a race war. Black people are going to come out on top, but they're not. He saw them as inferior. That, by the way, yeah, he was very racist, Charles Manson. I don't know if that was just his Appalachian upbringing, or what, but he
Well,
was a white supremacist.
let me tell you this. I have a friend that's a priest who is from Indiana, and he says, and I believe him. I mean, I have no reason not to, that Indiana is the most Klan
Yeah,
infested
and
state in the whole United
he spent
States,
a
which
lot of
is
time there too in various institutions. But yeah,
which is it's really foreign because you figured it'd be Mississippi or Alabama, but it's
no,
Indiana,
yeah,
which is considered a quote Yankee state unquote. Which I don't do it, but to be the most Klan.
well, and yeah, well, bordered on that Appalachia region that he and his family came from. And,
Yeah.
the southern parts of Indiana, Illinois, and Ohio could just as well be in the South. That's what I've always heard.
Oh yeah, true.
But yeah, he was very racist. And the reason I bring that up is this idea that the counterculture was all fit neatly into this left wing, lefty, left right paradigm on the left side of the spectrum. And that's just not true.
No, that's good that you bring that up because yeah, it has been shaped to be that. Yeah,
And
that's a good
in
point.
general, the so called far right, we can talk about the Nazis being actual socialists. They didn't just throw that word in there meaninglessly.
Well, the aim
Yeah.
and the
Um,
goal down there was to establish an occult nationalism.
yes, exactly.
Like the Nazis.
Yeah, he thought that black people couldn't handle it; they were inferior. So that after after they realized that, he would emerge and be their leader,
Right.
and they would be kind of his, and that the remnant of white people would rule over
Yeah.
them with him. And yeah, so yeah, not some lefty. He doesn't fit neatly into a right left paradigm. Is kind of what right and left, much like the Nazis, don't apply to him as well as we. And the whole right left paradigm is kind of a sham to begin with.
Well,
But
that's what I was
yeah,
about to say. In the
Yeah.
occult world, it's
yeah,
all it's that dualism. They want both of them, and they manipulate both of them.
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, I could talk about his background all day, but I don't want us to spend too much time on that. He at Spahn Ranch is when he starts having the orgies and the acid trips. They use mescaline, but also snorting quite a bit of speed
Yeah.
around this time that they're getting from the straight Satans, satanic biker gang. One of their members, Danny DiCarlo, is kind of a member of the family at this point, and he brings in a lot of drugs. Also, at this point, two very important people have joined them: Tex Watson,
Yeah, I was wondering if you're gonna
Charles
bring up text. You
Charles
can't.
Watson. He
Yeah.
just kind of a all American boy from Texas. He had been a football player, but
He was
very zealous.
Charlie's made man,
Yeah,
basically,
Charlie's
right?
right hand man. In
Yeah.
addition to another guy from Texas named Bruce Davis, who would go to England, be sent to England by Charlie, where he made contact with a certain cult we're going to mention later.
Isn't it amazing how Charlie had worldwide plans? I mean, that's
Yeah,
crazy.
yeah. He could just send people to England and they'd go. There's a story about him telling, I think, Susan Atkins, go down to Central America and bring me back a coconut. And she starts walking. He stops her, but gets up and is just going to do whatever she's got to do to get there. I mean, this is the power he had over these people.
Well, it just reminds me of the scripture, be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. It's like our minds are gonna be renewed
Yeah,
either by the Bible and by revelation or by
yeah.
this stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's all about which spirit are you letting in.
Exactly.
One thing he would do a lot of times is he would get everybody to take acid, and he would take either a very small dose or no dose at all. Just pretend he had taken a dose.
Yes.
Meanwhile, he's fully there while they're all tripping, and he can guide them in whatever direction he wants there.
Hmm.
He also becomes very paranoid around this time. He
Why?
had well, this really, and this kind of starts the downward spiral. He shoots a drug dealer named Bobby Lotsapapa Crow, a black gentleman who sold some drugs to one of the girls, and she didn't pay him, so he takes her hostage and threatens to come down and shoot up the ranch. So Manson shows up and shoots him with a 22. Doesn't kill him, but thinks he did, and also thinks he's a Black Panther. So that starts some of the he already had this idea of Helter Skelter, but this made him convinced that the Black Panthers were going to raid the camp and kill them. So
Well, Helter Skelter was a Beatles song.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where he gets a lot of these ideas from.
Yeah, he used it to divine from, basically, BT.
Yeah.
So
You know,
he's
he
listening
read.
to the Beatles music and he's getting his ideas. I mean,
Yep.
how
Yeah.
warped is
Yep.
that? It's
Yeah.
like bibliomancy or some kind of weird.
Yep.
Well, what
Exactly.
amazes me about, and just in our study of Laurel Canyon and the whole thing we've been like studying through is these poster children for the left, like Lindsay was saying, were racist, and they were all these things like that I will get into it in another episode. But like Stephen Crosby, like he collected guns. I mean,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean,
Right.
what liberal collects guns?
Yeah.
Anyway, it's just
Well, yeah.
it's an enigma wrapped up in a paradox. A lot of this stuff, and that's what shows me, in my opinion, that it's something bigger than them, which is probably the CIA or some government entity, but even something bigger than that, which we go back to the sinister forces that were experimenting.
Yeah. I think another song was Revolution 9 was another one
Yep.
he got a lot of
Yep.
ideas from
Yep.
because, and of course that may have been the infamous one that played back to where it had all that weird number 9 or something like that.
Yeah. The back mass part. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
But yeah,
well, I find it interesting that he thinks that Manson thinks this guy's a Black Panther, which is going back to the dualism of the occult aspect of all this.
yeah,
The CIA is like a hand, and they have the glove in the countercultural white
yeah.
hippie movement, but they have their hand in the Black Panther slash you know uh, racist movement too. It's like it's interesting.
So I don't
Yeah.
doubt that the CIA and possibly even the LAPD and Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, both of whom had similar sort of almost CIA type units, saw
Intelligence
him
units.
kind of they were dealing with the Panthers and other Black Power groups at the time. I don't doubt that they probably had some sort of the enemy of my enemy is my friend kind of view of Manson, and maybe hoped he would be someone who could um I don't know, maybe attack the Panthers or something.
All right, let me ask you a question, Lindsay. Yeah, and if you don't know, we can figure it out real quick. When did the Watts riots happen? It's about this time period, right? I mean, so
Yeah.
that's significant, I think, to this story. It's in the is it the early
So
'60s
that
after
was in
Kennedy?
'65.
Yeah,
Watts riots
okay,
were in '65, so that was quite a bit before this. But they
but
created
it's
a
an
lot of
atmosphere.
the atmosphere
Yep.
that Manson he would have heard about that in prison, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I mean, he knew about the Beatles. That's where his obsession with the Beatles started when he was in prison. Anyway, so yeah, they're at Spahn Ranch. They shoot this drug dealer. They think he's a Black Panther. He shoots Bobby Crow. This creates a lot of fear and paranoia.
Yep.
So that brings us up to July of '69 when the first murder happens. A guy named Gary Hinman had been someone that they had spent a lot of time with.
Yep.
Sold drugs to them occasionally. He was a gay guy who kind of had a thing for Bobby Beausoleil. We got to mention him real quick.
Yeah. Yeah. I was about to say you mentioned Tex, but Bobby Beausoleil
Bobby
is
Beausoleil. Well, to begin with, he was more an associate at first than a kind of a full member of the family. He kind of had his own thing going on.
yeah, yeah.
He he was probably a much better musician than Manson.
Well, wasn't he
He
from
had
Louisiana? Wasn't he Southern too, like Tex? I mean,
sure sounds like it, but no, he was born in the Santa Barbara area
oh,
of
okay, okay,
California.
okay.
It does sound like a very Louisiana name.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no, he was born in the Santa Barbara area. Maybe his
Well,
parents came from there originally. I don't know, but
he was like competition for
yeah. Well, I
Charles
mean,
for a
yeah,
while,
he
right?
kind of had his own little harem, he, um, kind of both a respect thing and a little bit of competition. Manson didn't mess with his girls, and he didn't mess with Manson's girls. But yeah, there was somewhat of I would imagine there was some jealousy and competition going on there because he was a little
Yeah.
bit more independent. Now he did become more involved with the family later, but
Yeah.
Because at some point he's living there, and Manson sends him to Gary Hinman's house.
Now, is Gary Hinman the hairdresser?
No. That was J.C. Bring.
Okay, yeah, we haven't got to him yet.
He was kind of their very famous hairdresser.
Did all the stars.
Yep. You know, you had to pay $25 to get your hair cut by him, whereas most people were paying like $1.50 for a haircut back
Wow.
then.
Wow.
Anyway, yeah, they go to Gary Hinman's house. You know, some people say he had burned them on some drugs. The family on some drugs, some a mescaline or something. Others say that they had heard that Bobby Beausoleil just says it was about drugs, but some of the family members say no, they thought he had just gotten a $20,000 inheritance. And this was, you know, they wanted him to pay for the money he had supposedly cheated them out of on the drugs, but also just get this money from him. And
Right.
he
The
refuses.
answer's
Now,
probably yes. It's probably both.
yeah,
Anyway.
yeah. Well, alleged. Now, Beausoleil denied this later, but all the other accounts, Manson shows up and is a part of this. Actually brings a sword that he had got from the Straight Satans, and at some point they've got him restricted and tied up. They're beating him, and Manson shows up and slashes into his ear and jaw with the sword. So this idea that Manson wasn't involved, that he just kind of no, he was directly involved in at least 2 of the murders. This one and another one we'll talk about.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, at some point Manson tells Bobby, you know, he knows too much, you got to kill him. So Bobby stabs him to death, and they take some of his cars. And so this was in July of 69 that this happens. Around August 6th, so this is getting very close to the murder, Bobby gets picked up with one of Hinman's cars and driving one of Hinman's cars and goes to jail for it. So part of the motivation for the subsequent murders, besides this, and yeah, by the way, this is the first place where they write a message in blood on the wall. Political piggy. Beausoleil writes that because they're already thinking, we want them to think this is some sort of politically motivated Black Panther slaying. He gets caught with one of Hinman's cars and taken in. So part of the motivation for the subsequent murders is they say, well, if we commit similar murders, we can get Bobby out of jail because they'll think the murder's still free. The copycat theory, the murder. And I think there's some truth to that. Susan Atkins says that was the primary motivation. They just wanted to get Bobby out, and they're not thinking straight, these people.
Well, duh. I mean, how much drugs?
The simple fact that they're going, let's murder somebody else.
I know.
They've got a madman leading them who's not real smart.
No, actually, he's brilliant.
He's brilliantly smart. That's the
demonically brilliant.
Demonically, but you know, he has his moments where old Appalachian hick takes over, and he's not real smart.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah. Oh yeah.
It's so yeah. So
if we have any fans out there in Appalachia, we love you. We're not talking about everybody.
Yeah. Anyway, Manson gets Tex Watson and tells him the evening of August 8th, he gets Tex Watson and tells him to get together a crew and some knives and a .22 pistol and go to this house. They were familiar with this house. Manson had been there before. He was kind of sent away by an Iranian guy who was doing a photo shoot with Sharon Tate. So he knew about it, and Tex had been there before too. They had may have been to some of the wild parties that happened there. So yeah, they tell them to kill everybody there, and he just instructs the girls that went with him, which was Patricia Krenwinkel, what a name, and Susan Atkins and Linda Kasabian.
Okay.
To get in this car and go to the 10050 Cielo Drive.
Cielo Drive, that's right.
in the Benedict Canyon area. Some of the
Actually,
sources. Go
sidebar
for it.
here. They actually tore that house down because everybody, whoever lives there now, it's a new house. You can't go see the old house. I mean, you have to look at pictures.
Yeah.
Somebody bought the land and they tore that house down, which is
Well,
kind of interesting. So
yeah. Well, you can thank Trent Reznor partially for that.
yeah,
He brought more attention to it later, but
yeah.
anyway, yeah. So they show up, cut some cord outside, thinking that would kill the electricity. I don't think it did. I think it was just to the gate or something like that. But so yeah, they show up at this house. They get Linda Kasabian to just kind of stay at the bottom. They park at the bottom of the hill where the driveway is.
Lookout, right?
Yeah, she was just kind of a lookout. Meanwhile, there's a guy named William Garrettson who's living in the guest house. Is just kind of a groundskeeper for Rudy Altabelli, the owner of the house. And he's entertaining a guy named Steve Parent. Steve Parent, he had met him a few times, given him a ride back to the house before. And Steve Parent is just this young guy who is selling electronic equipment. He's trying to sell him one of the early digital alarm clocks, basically.
Okay.
And he's hanging out with William Garrettson and then leaves. He's leaving he actually backed into the fence there. He's leaving just as Tex and the crew are coming in. And of course, he comes across them coming up the driveway. And Tex walks up to him. He could tell something's going on. And he basically begs for his life. Hey, don't hurt me. I won't tell anybody. Tex slashes his wrist with a knife and then shoots him in the chest and abdomen with the .22 and kills him. They roll the car down the hill. They come up. In the house are Wojtek Frykowski and Abigail Folger, who live in Laurel Canyon, are just staying there to kind of keep Sharon Tate company.
Now, this is, I want to throw this out here, but Abigail Folger is the heiress to the Folger
The Folgers
coffee.
Coffee Company.
Yeah, yeah.
Her and her live-in boyfriend, Wojtek Frykowski,
Who's an artist.
Yeah, an artist and a Holocaust survivor.
Yeah.
He's an artist, but he's basically just supported by her, and she's supported by her family mostly. She worked as a social worker as well as working on some political campaigns around this time.
Yeah.
But yeah, she's there. Jay Sebring is also living there. He's an ex-boyfriend and just really good friend of Sharon Tate. Like I said, famous hairdresser around this time. In regularly to cut Frank Sinatra's hair. I mean, he was a well-known guy. He was also friends with Roman Polanski, Sharon's husband, who's overseas shooting a film around this time.
Which is an interesting.
So it sounds like she was hired to be a honeypot, is what that is.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh yeah,
That's
definitely.
basically a CIA co-op just to get info. I mean, or spread news or whatever around.
Yep.
Yeah, could be for sure. So yeah, Jay Sebring's there, and of course Sharon Tate, the wife of Roman Polanski, who's overseas around this time.
Roman Polanski, big film guy.
Rosemary's Baby.
Rosemary's Baby. Yep.
The Ninth
Cult
Gate.
film. The Ninth Gate. Yeah.
Connected with Kenneth Anger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of a sleazy guy. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. He had those bad behaviors with underage girls too.
Well, and yeah, is basically filming videos of his wife with other men around this time, which kind of pressuring her into doing it. So yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, Sharon Tate is there, Wojtek Frykowski, Jay Sebring, and Abigail Folger. So far, they've killed poor Steve Parent, who just wrong place, wrong time.
Yeah.
Tex sneaks into the back and to a back window and just kind of lets the rest of the crew in. They initially come across Frykowski asleep on a couch, wake him up, rough him up a little bit. They send Susan Atkins, who has like her hair cut short except for one lock extending down. Probably looked pretty scary. They send her to the back to see who else is back there. As she's passing Abigail Folger's room, She waves and smiles at her. Abigail Folger waves and smiles back at her. She goes to the back, looks into the room to see J.C. Bring and Sharon Tate just having a conversation. She goes back and reports what she saw to Tex. Tex tells her, all right, we'll go get him, bring him in here. She goes and gets them at knife point, and brings them all terrified, I'm sure. And they tie them together in the living room. At some point, Tex makes the infamous statement, I'm the devil and I'm here to do the devil's business. Give us all your money. They
All right.
rob
Well,
them.
that's a
Yeah.
perfect segue for a question I have.
All right,
Lindsay.
go for it.
And it's the $10,000 question. And I know, just give us your speculations because there's not empirical answer to this. What was all this about? Was it about money? Was it about drugs? You know, you have the story that's put out. You know, it's kind of like the JFK stuff. You have the Warren Commission BS that's put out, but then you have the what like really could have gone on. In this case, what was the conventional story, and then what do you think happened?
I mean, the conventional story, according to Bugliosi, who wrote kind of the authoritative account, Helter Skelter, he just thought
Yeah.
it was just that they were trying to stir up a race war, that this was their way of starting the whole Helter Skelter.
Oh, and so most of the people they killed were liberals, probably, or left
Yes,
wing, right?
yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. That needs to be said
Well, that's
because
kind of weird and interesting because the whole thing with Charles Manson is that guy, he swung both ways.
Yeah.
oh yeah,
And so
Yeah.
it's kind of like he's living in the free love, this is the kicking off of that free love stuff. This is all, do whatever you want to do as long as it feels good and you're consenting, well, quote unquote, consenting adults.
just Crowley stuff. Anyway,
Just
do
saying.
us thou art.
According to most accounts, Tex Watson did most of the killing. Now, Susan Atkins initially said she stabbed Sharon Tate, who was 8 months pregnant, by the way, around this time.
Yeah.
Ugh.
And even licked some of her blood. Sorry.
We're now explicit.
Yeah. Later, she claimed she merely thought about it. She also claimed later that she didn't do much stabbing, that she only stabbed Frykowski when she struggled with him. He jerked a piece of her hair out. Anyway, they were all killed. Two of them managed to get free and run out on the lawn where they were finished off. Abigail
Well, whose
Folger.
blood was it supposedly written on the wall? Is that ever been
I believe
revealed?
it was Sharon Tate's. The blood's
Okay.
interesting because they found Sharon Tate was never on the porch that we know
Yeah.
of, but they found some of her blood type on the porch,
Interesting.
in addition to a bloody boot heel print, which no one who was supposed to have been there was wearing boots. Manson claims he came by later and rearranged some stuff, but he didn't wear boots. He wore moccasins. Tex was wearing moccasins.
Right.
If the girls were wearing shoes at all, they probably weren't boots.
Well, let me ask you this: while we're at this topic, wasn't this kind of a, I mean, we're already explicit, kind of a foobar situation with the police and all this stuff when they came in too. I mean, I know
Yeah,
Manson came back and cleaned
yeah.
up, but then the police kind of like they have in most Laurel Canyon stuff.
The police, in addition to letting Polanski come in and take some of his tapes that were there. Yeah.
Right.
They made a mess at the scene.
They don't
Yeah.
want those.
So anyway, that's the first killing. And then they head back. A night later, Manson's not satisfied with the way this one went down, so he goes in person to the next one. They drive down to Waverly Drive, and this time it's Manson, Leslie Van Houten, a guy named Clem Grogan, in addition to Susan Atkins, Tex Watson, and Linda Kasabian again. Manson just wasn't satisfied with the sloppiness and just general disorganization of this killing, so he wants to go there and be a little bit more a part of it, which this one doesn't turn out much different, to be honest. But yeah, so yeah, they drive down to a neighborhood called Los Feliz, Waverly Drive on Los Feliz, the night of August 10th, and they stop next to a house of a guy named Harold True. He's often mentioned as a family member. I wouldn't. I mean, if he's a family member, then why not Dennis Wilson? Yeah, they
Yeah.
hung out at his house a few times. He
Well,
lived next.
they hung out at Mama Cass's house.
Yeah,
You
was she a
know, I
family
mean, so
member? You know.
yeah, exactly.
So yeah, so Manson sneaks into the house next door. This is the home of Leno and Rosemary Labianca. Leno is a just he owns a chain of grocery stores. His wife's kind of got her own business ventures, but they're kind of a grocery store family. They're pretty well off. Tom O'Neill, who wrote the Chaos book that I read, this
Yeah,
wasn't
good
in the
book.
book that I remember, but he in on a Joe Rogan podcast, he says that one of his sources said that Leno LaBianca actually got his hair cut by Jay Sebring. So there's a connection there. They weren't totally unconnected, but other than that, there doesn't seem to be many connections. We know his phone line was being tapped by law enforcement. I thought that was interesting.
I
Uh,
think most of them were, to be honest
the
with you,
the
in
the
in the
LaBianca
opinion.
house,
Yeah,
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 was being tapped by law enforcement. Manson is directly involved in this. He goes in sometimes, some accounts with Tex Watson, sometimes alone. That's another kind of
yeah.
thing they can't get straightened out. But he did go in and tie up Bianca on the couch, Lino, the husband, on the couch, and Rosemary in the room. You know, and assured them they'd be okay. They're just going to rob you.
Yeah, right.
Um, then he sends the crew in, and yeah, they stab them. This is again, they write stuff on the wall. They misspell Helter
Yeah.
Skelter. Rise, death to pigs. They stab them both to death. They stick a fork into Lino's belly, just to kind
Stick a
of,
fork. Okay.
yeah, just to kind of
Interesting.
capitalize on the pig, death
Right.
to
Put a
pigs, sort of.
stick a fork in it. He's done.
And the three people he leaves there just kind of hang out and have a snack and hitchhike their way
Oh,
back later.
the
Yeah,
world of a psychopath.
Yeah,
it is.
and
I'm gonna stop and have a snack after I just killed
Apparently
three people.
killing causes hunger.
so
Yeah.
so that's the two murders, and the police claim they didn't. I think there's pretty good evidence that they did know that there was a connection, but for whatever reason, they claimed that they couldn't connect these two murders. I mean, come on, writing in blood,
Oh
and
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So anyway, yeah, that's the murders.
Well, let me I want to kind of connect this because we need to probably
Yeah,
Yeah.
wrap it in, but I want to connect this with and I want to hear you talk, if you will, about the occult connections
okay, yeah, that's a good. Yeah.
involved and tied up in a nice, neat bow. You know what I'm
All
saying?
right. So first, you've got Church of Scientology,
Right. L. Ron Hubbard.
occult, and a cult.
Yes.
Yes,
If
yes.
anyone is, a very dangerous group. I mean, thanks to Leah Remini, who finally, I loved some of she did a documentary out. I mean, yeah, they're a terrible group. They're abusive.
Yep.
They're as
Yep.
abusive as Manson. Who knows how many bodies they've left in their wake. But anyway, while he was at McNeil Island, he gets involved in Scientology and allegedly, he claimed, reached the clear status.
Right.
Well, what's that?
Right.
Explain that. What's
Well,
clear mean?
that's just kind of the highest in their audits, where you find your thetans, these little booger bears that are in you. I still haven't
Yeah.
figured a lot
Yeah.
of it
That's
out,
pretty,
and
no, that's
it's
pretty
where
much what it is.
you're totally clear of these booger bears by that point.
They're all your personal traumas. You know, if you were
Yeah,
a child and you got dropped or you skinned your knee when you were
yeah,
6 months old, this is something that's obviously causing harm for you later on.
yeah,
Well, see that sounds like to me, that sounds legitimate, but it's a counterfeit of something legitimate.
Yeah.
I mean,
It sure is.
psychology and stuff. You deal with trauma and you deal with all that kind of stuff. Sandy and I in our ministry, we deal with that kind of stuff. But yeah, they weren't called booger bears or
Yeah.
Audits are
thetans.
Well,
nothing
I mean,
more than
eh, eh,
blackmail.
Thetans, yeah, Thetans, yeah.
He,
He reached the status of Thetan clear, which is the highest.
Like Tom Cruise.
Yeah. So,
or
but
John
then
Travolta.
he kind of pulled away. I don't think
Yeah.
He was
Charles
clear.
Manson.
Clear.
He wasn't going to stick with one cult. He wasn't going to sit under
No.
some hierarchy. He had his own idea. So yeah, he was involved in Scientology, but also didn't like it. Had run-ins. There was a guy out in Death Valley who took some of his followers away, and so he had kind of a love-hate relationship with Scientology. But that connection's there.
He picked that up in jail, right?
Yes,
Scientology.
in McNeil Island.
Yeah.
Another group he's associated with. It's hard to find some smoking gun connection there, but there's no doubt that he had knowledge and perhaps even met some of the leaders of this group. The Process Church, the Process Church of Final Judgment. It was a Scientology offshoot started in England by a guy named Robert de Grimston and his wife. They were an offshoot, kind of kicked out of the of Scientology, but still would claim to be part of Scientology when it suited them or they needed to get out of trouble. But yeah.
Well, they were probably the real Scientology.
Oh yeah. Marianne de Grimston was his wife. She went by the name Hecate or Hecate. How do you pronounce that? BT.
Hecate.
The goddess.
Yeah. Hecate. I mean, it's Greek,
Hecate.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
She
one
also
of the three.
She was also alleged to go by the name Circe, another Greek goddess associated with witchcraft.
Yeah.
That also is connected to another cult I'm going to talk about briefly in a minute here. But yeah, she was seen as this. She was seen as some embodiment of Hecate, whereas her husband Robert de Grimston was seen as this embodiment of Christ.
Okay.
They had this notion of Christ and Satan being united, one person.
So he imbibed a lot of this. It's in his doctrine.
Yeah.
His dogma.
Manson had the same idea that he was Christ and Satan in one. But
of course.
Okay.
So yeah,
he's a perfect cult leader. I mean,
the dualism.
Yeah, they were known to walk around in long black robes, which the family did also from time to time.
Right.
They had a weird. It's not really a trinity. It was more just like tritheism. There was three separate gods they thought were in part of it. Jehovah, Lucifer, who was not the same as Satan to them,
right,
and Satan,
right.
And there were three sort of factions within that you could join. The Jehovians were the real strict, austere, celibate group. The Luciferians were more the harmonious, peace and love, light group. And I mean, the Satanists were like the dark nihilists of the group. Anyway.
So what other connections did he have? What other occult connections?
He gets involved in the Process Church. What's that all about?
Well, for one, there was a guy named Brother Eli who lived in the LA area and was a Process member. The Process were involved with the Diggers in LA, but they were also very much involved with some of the same bikers that Manson was associated with. Brother Eli was a member of the Process who made leather goods, including some of the buckskins that Manson would wear later. So he knew Manson, but Manson sends Bruce Davis later to England. Initially, Davis works at a Scientology center there, but at some point just goes to sort of this mansion in London that the Process cult keeps. And so, yeah, Manson borrows so much from this group and sends this guy to England, and he just happens upon the Process. No, I think he sent them there to find out more and perhaps get some support from them.
Yep.
So yeah, the process was in L.A., both San Francisco and L.A. around the time. Manson was there, and yeah, he just borrows so much language from them. This idea of Satan and he simplified it to a duality in one person in him. But yeah, he got that idea from them. The swastika symbol that he carved on his head
Mm-hmm.
wasn't just like a Nazi swastika. A lot of people think it was the
Well, it was
process swastika.
Yeah.
because it's actually
Yeah.
backwards, isn't it? It's
Yep.
backwards from the Nazi
Yeah.
swastika. Right.
Yeah.
It's the
So
India.
It's the
What is
Indian
it?
one.
Yeah. Yeah.
in
From
addition,
India.
the process visited him in jail, and after they visited him, he refused to talk about the process anymore. After he jailed for the murders,
Hmm.
Okay.
and the
Interesting.
process were very much Ed Sanders, The Family. I got a lot from his book. I got the first edition deliberately so I could read about the process. The process sued the publisher of The Family. Ed Sanders, a word on him. He was lead singer of a band called The Fugs. I don't know.
Okay.
Edit that out, Sandy. No. A band called The Fugs.
Yeah, I know the folks.
He was a beat poet. He he was a part of the Yippies, which were kind of this political movement. He was involved in the so-called exorcism of the Pentagon, and for whatever reason, he was just very much fascinated by this and started newspaper clippings and writing notes whenever he saw it on the news, and eventually just decides to write a book about it. He goes out west and interviews people and writes a book called The Family. Hold on, I've got it right here. Let me give you the full title because it's really cool. The Family, the story of Charles Manson's Dune Buggy Attack Battalion. The Process Church sues him and has the any reference to them taken out of all subsequent editions. The one you listened to, Brandon, wouldn't have had this in it, though it did
Okay.
have some extra material added later.
What are some of the other occult groups? I'm trying to kind of land the plane here.
I'm sorry. Yeah, this is difficult. But yeah. So some of the other occult groups were the OTO Solar Lodge.
Which was
They
started by
were
Parson.
yeah. Well, they claimed to be
Jack Parsons,
descended
right?
from the Agape Lodge, an early OTO group that
Right.
was directly under Crowley.
Crowley.
And yet they were the association with them is that around this time this all happens, they had the infamous boy in the box
Yep.
situation where they had put a kid in this metal box. He probably wasn't in there as long as people thought he was, but
Long enough.
yeah, long enough. He survived, but obviously the kid got taken away from them, and
Yeah. Put in a box, put in the desert, in the heat.
They got shut down too.
yeah, they got
basically,
shut down, and they were associated with them, and
Interesting.
or they were just associated. People wondered if they weren't connected to the murders mostly. There was
Interesting.
another group called the Kirke Order of Dog Blood. Now, Kirke is just the more Greek pronunciation of Circe.
Right.
This was a cult in the, I believe, Santa Cruz area that just had a lot of the same sort of process type language and this Circe association. They sacrifice dogs, and very little is known about them. Also, around the same time, some of the family members claim that they saw a snuff film with a human sacrifice on it that sounds a lot like the kind of thing the Kirke order was doing. So, yeah, that just shows you that the family was aware of some of these other occult groups here in this area. There was also another group called the 4P cult that's very shadowy. They seem to be another process offshoot. Their leader, no one knows exactly who he was, other than that he went by the title Grand Chingon, or Head Chingon, Master Chingon. Manson's followers occasionally called him this. So a lot of people have connected that. But yeah, it's not even the connection with the family. It just shows you that Manson wasn't alone. You know, there were
Well,
all these groups out there and all these bodies showing up in different places. And Manson, in some ways, not to say that he didn't do it, but he still almost becomes a patsy to everything that's going on. And you
yeah,
also
he
have
does.
the
Yeah.
man, how could I forget this guy's name? The
Hmm.
Zodiac killings going on around the same time.
Yeah.
So that's all the occult connections.
Yeah. Manson definitely becomes the patsy for all things.
Yeah,
And yeah, I have a friend who grew up in Oregon at this time period, and he said, he just told me that just the palpable fear of the family, and after all this happening, it just it sent the whole West Coast into like
yeah,
this fear mode,
yeah.
and
Fear, and that's when government step in and say, "All right, well, you need to trust us and do everything we say. We'll keep you safe from
yep.
these bad guys," kind of thing.
Which
So yeah,
which leads me to ultimately to speculate that the government was involved, whatever branch it was,
yeah,
and also which brings me, and all the occult brings me back to the whole place where we started, and I'm gonna end it here.
yeah,
Is it back to these sinister forces?
yeah,
This whole Laurel Canyon mystique, this whole Laurel Canyon thing that we're taking a deep dive into is just I don't know if I can use this word for it, but a honeypot for the sinister forces, and it
yeah,
seems to be a hub even now with modern day Hollywood. It still is like the hub of the spokes of a lot
Yeah.
of involvement and propaganda and just
Well,
demonization of the United States.
I mean,
So
Charles Manson really showed that the sinister forces really represent a chilling reminder that humanity's capacity for darkness
yeah,
hmm
and the easiness to be manipulated
yeah, that's
is a
huge.
is a very well-founded cautionary tale that
yeah,
continues
Yep.
to intrigue us and disturb us at the same time.
Well, and two, that's why we need to be so careful, with our discernment in
Yeah,
these days. Whether
yeah,
we're in the end times. They started in
no
Pentecost,
douut.
but whether we're in the end times, that's debatable. But we need to be cautious even now because there's things that are infiltrating the church that sound good and all this kind of
Yeah.
stuff. And if we aren't aware of the methods of manipulation, I like that term, the methods of manipulation that these sinister forces have through natural human means, but also through dogma, doctrinal type things, we can be duped. The Bible says
yeah,
so. The Bible says
yeah.
so. Well, guys, thank you, Lindsay. Thank you for all your deep dive, bro. We
Oh, I
appreciate it.
enjoyed it.
And BT, thank you for your interjection.
You
And
got it.
yeah, and this was a good show. So,
It was a good show.
yep, we'll end on there. See you later, everybody out there.
Thanks, guys.
Peace.
Peace out. Thanks for listening and supporting us. And remember, stay naturally supernatural.